Analysts have further stressed that a marginal decline in the quarterly labour force survey will not dramatically change South Africa's historically high unemployment. This comes as the local market is expecting that third quarter reading following the slight drop in the overall unemployment rate. The household-based sample survey measures the labour market activities of individuals aged between 15 and 64 years, youth unemployment remaining one of the biggest issues. Africa Tukkun CEO Onyi Nwaneri speaks to us now. Thank you so much for your time, Onyi. Following the second quarter QLFS, Africa Tukkun came out to indicate that there is a digital divide that is exacerbating the unemployment situation in South Africa. Talk us through how important that upskilling is going to be going into the future of work in this country.
No, thank you for having me. We celebrate the fact that unemployment has decreased, but at the same time, we recognize that we're sitting with a country that has the highest youth unemployment in the world, and we need to look at a different way of approaching this problem. One of the challenges that we want to pose for employers of labor is to look at a coordinated and a collaborative approach. And part of this is looking at where the jobs are created at the moment, especially the sectors that are creating it the most, the tech sector, the financial services sector. We see that still in the tech sector, close to 28,000 jobs are being, imported out of South Africa, causing us to lose close to 8.5 billion revenue that could have been kept in the country. So our position is that, we need to look at skills first as opposed to just formal qualification.
Now, having said that, in the South African landscape, we know that we have a long-standing issue when it comes to a barrier of entry, particularly on the side of education. What's to be said about the needs of the labour force that would be aiming at creating employment in this country and ridding South Africa of that stigma as well as a historic proposition of being the highest with an unemployment rate across the world?
The big challenge is that we're still very much dependent on education and formal qualification for hiring practices. A lot of our HR departments are still quite traditional around how we hire, yet the world has moved on. The world is speaking about micro-credentialing. The world is looking at skills, who can do the job, rather than the qualifications you have. In fact, if you look at the rate and pace in which our formal educational institutions, graduate people, and by the time they graduate people, the world have moved on in terms of the skills that industry requires. Hence the conversation around the mismatch of talent. And so for us to create an effective change in our country, especially when it comes to unemployment and youth unemployment, we have to have a complete change of mindset and attitude when it comes to hiring practices. We need to not focus on formal qualifications. We need to focus on what are the skills that we require as a business, and it's immaterial whether someone has the formal qualification as long as they have the skills they need, that you need as a business, and they demonstrate that they have those skills. If we start looking in that direction, I can assure you that we'll start seeing a very different picture when it comes to unemployment. Also, we also understand that the corporate sector is a little bit worried, or the employers, about the standards in which the skills are currently being trained by training institutions. So perhaps another conversation would be, how do we standardize that? And we know a number of collectives and forums that are trying to standardize, the level of skills that is required for certain roles and positions. And if we focus on driving the agenda of skills, rather than just the agenda of formal qualification, and the agenda of we need to work together collaboratively and coordinate ourselves to create the employment that this country desperately needs, then we'll start seeing some changes.
Onyi, with that landscape in the country, what's then to be said about how far South Africa is lagging with regards to its peers across the continent? It's created a debate currently in South Africa about foreign skilled labor that's been acquired.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and the reason why it's an interesting is that we still have to recognize our past, and I know it's difficult to speak to that past, and we still have a country where there's high inequality, there's high poverty. In fact, our inequality is the highest in the world. And so when it comes to competing, when in relation to skills, we still see a lot of importation of skills into the country because of the challenge of the quality of education, the number of young people and children who are currently having substandard education that then completely puts them in a difficult position for the rest of their life unless there is urgent remediation, urgent intervention in relation to the kind of skills that, especially when we look at South Africa, focusing on, not strengthening its STEM and many schools looking at the matric pass rates rather than the quality of matric. And so when it comes to skills in the country, on the one hand, we have huge challenges comparable, to our peers within the continent and also globally. But I also want to say that there's efforts that's being made collectively by the government, by civil society, and by corporate sector. So I think the question is not how do we compare ourselves with the continent, which I think there's a lot more we can do. I think the question is how do we look within ourselves and say what are the key challenges have we got, considering our past, considering our history, considering the current circumstances that we have in the country, and what can we do as a collective about it.
Lastly, your expectations this time around, of course, another marginal drop would be welcomed, although it would be a dent given where we sit with the high unemployment.
Well, I think it's no longer a question of celebrating a marginal drop. A marginal drop is not solving our problem. If you look at our rate of crime, our rate of drugs, our rate of gangsterism, our rate of pregnancy, it all speaks to an unproductive workforce, a workforce that is extremely young. Our average median age is very, very young, sitting at in the 20s. And so the big question is, should we be satisfied with a marginal drop? Or should we be looking at radical changes in the way we look at skills, in the way we look at education, in the way we look at employment, and in the way we look at young people as a whole, and how we trust them with responsibility, in the way we collaborate and coordinate as civil society, public sector and private sector. And I think it's time we stop paying lip service to this fact and say it's no longer about celebrating the marginal drops. It's about a radical change in how we do things. And that radical change comes with a mindset change, an attitude change, and a collaborative and coordinative approach as opposed to a competitive approach within the South African context.
Onyi Nwaneri, CEO of Africa Tikkun, in our build-up to the latest quarterly labor force survey that's expected from Stats SA later today.